Ouagadougou, July 15, 2026. A convoy of black government vehicles pulls up outside a walled compound flying a circle of gold stars. Inside, two European diplomats are parking. They have 72 hours. Before, quiet diplomatic cables, polite handshakes, business as usual. Now, an ultimatum delivered in public through a state news agency for the world to see. The deputy head of the European Union's delegation, the program officer overseeing millions in development funds, both declared persona non grata, both ordered out, no warning shots, no slow fade, just a door closing. What did they see coming that the rest of the world didn't? And what happens when a government the West once dismissed as fragile decides it no longer needs permission to act? This is the story of a small, landlocked nation telling one of the most powerful blocs on earth, your time here is over. Watch closely, because what happens next in Burkina Faso may already be happening in a dozen other capitals across the continent. For decades, the old reality looked like this: a foreign delegation compound in the capital, a rotating cast of European officials, and a country whose foreign policy ran, in practice, through Brussels and Paris. The numbers tell the story better than any speech. Since 2015, jihadist violence linked to groups such as JNIM has displaced over 2 million Burkinabè from their homes. Entire provinces slipped out of state control. Villages burned while foreign partners debated troop mandates in conference rooms 4,000 kilometers away. Operation Barkhane, the French-led military intervention meant to crush the insurgency across the Sahel, poured in billions of euros and thousands of soldiers. The result on the ground was different. Attacks did not stop. They multiplied. By the time French forces withdrew in 2022 and 2023, many Burkinabè were not counting years of partnership. They were counting funerals. Meanwhile, aid flowed in through familiar channels, reports, workshops, capacity building seminars in air-conditioned hotels, development officers signed off on programs, ambassadors gave interviews about democratic values, and soldiers on the front lines waited for helicopters that rarely came. This was the old reality. Partnership on paper, abandonment on the ground. Consider the numbers again, slower this time. Over 2 million displaced, thousands of soldiers deployed by foreign partners, billions of euros spent, and still, by 2022, nearly half the country's territory sat beyond the reach of the central government. A single statistic does not capture a burned school. It does not capture a mother walking for days with her children toward a displacement camp because the promised reinforcements never came. But the statistic explains why so many Burkinabè stopped believing the old partnership was working at all. Something had to break. The only question was when. Then, in September 2022, Captain Ibrahim Traoré seized power, the second coup in a single year, and made a promise that cut through the noise: security first, sovereignty always, and no more foreign lectures over a national crisis. The old guard in Europe did not take this seriously. A young captain, barely in his 30s, running a poor Sahelian state, surely this would collapse within months. It didn't. Under Traoré, the government launches domestic programs the old system never prioritized. A national housing initiative breaks ground, promising affordable homes built by Burkinabè labor, not foreign contractors. A new expressway and infrastructure push, the Faso-Mebo program, mobilizes citizens and machinery to rebuild roads the old partnerships had promised for years and never delivered. School farms sprout beside classrooms under a new education initiative, teaching children to grow food as part of their curriculum, not just read about food security in a textbook. None of this erases the security crisis, but it signals something the old partners never quite grasped: a government determined to prove it can build even while it fights, and that determination collides head-on with Brussels. Because the story does not end with a coup, it escalates with a resolution. On June 18, 2026, the European Parliament adopts a formal resolution condemning what it calls the persistence of repression of civic space and fundamental freedoms inside Burkina Faso. The text is sharp. It calls for independent investigations into alleged human rights abuses. It frames Ouagadougou's transitional government as a threat to its own people. Brussels intended this as pressure. Ouagadougou receives it as an insult. 4 days later, on June 22nd, Burkina Faso's foreign minister, Karamoko Jean-Marie Traoré, Traore summons the European Union's ambassador. The message delivered is blunt. This resolution is interference in the internal affairs of a sovereign nation. It will not be tolerated. Brussels tries to frame the resolution as concern. Ouagadougou reframes it as an attack. Therefore, the diplomatic machinery that once absorbed criticism quietly now answers publicly and fast. Weeks pass. Nothing is resolved. The resolution stands unretracted. The European Parliament does not walk it back, and in Ouagadougou, patience, already thin after a decade of failed partnerships, runs out entirely. Then comes July 14th. AIB, the Agence d'Information du Burkina, breaks the news. 2 senior EU officials ordered to leave. 72 hours on the clock. Who is the enemy of progress here? For the transitional government, it is not the ambassador. It is not even Brussels as an institution. It is a decade-old habit. Powerful capitals treating African governance as something to be graded, monitored, and corrected from the outside. And who is the hero of sovereignty? A government that, however contested internationally, refuses to let a foreign parliament dictate the terms of its own internal politics. The clash escalates further. France, already reeling from its own retreat from the region, quietly confirms it has withdrawn all remaining diplomats from Burkina Faso. One Western presence shrinks, another prepares too. But therefore, as one door closes in Ouagadougou, another opens elsewhere. On July 12th, the chairperson of the African Union Commission, Mahmoud Ali Yusuf, begins a 2-day working visit to Mali. 2 days later, he lands in Burkina Faso itself, describing his mission as strengthening the continent's ability to face its own challenges together. The timing is not lost on anyone watching closely. As Western diplomats pack their bags, African leadership arrives at the airport. Is this coincidence, or is it the shape of a new alliance forming in real time? Officials in Ouagadougou frame the African Union visit as proof of a broader thaw, relations with continental institutions warming even as ties with European ones freeze. The message, without ever needing a press conference to spell it out, is simple. Burkina Faso is not isolating itself from the world. It is choosing deliberately which parts of the world it still wants to talk to. That distinction matters. Isolation is a collapse. Realignment is a strategy. To understand where this is heading, look past Ouagadougou's city limits toward the wider architecture Burkina Faso has been building since 2023. Burkina Faso does not stand alone in this confrontation. It stands inside the Alliance of Sahel States, AES, a security and economic pact forged with Mali and Niger, 3 nations that each expelled or downgraded relations with former colonial partners, then turned toward each other instead. The physical proof is not abstract. It is visible on tarmacs and in ports. Russian-linked security personnel operating under what is widely known as the Africa Corps now train and support Burkinabè forces once dependent on French logistics. Chinese-financed infrastructure, roads, dams, communication networks rises in provinces where Western contractors once hesitated to build without years of feasibility studies. The AES bloc left ECOWAS, the regional body long seen in Ouagadougou, Bamako, and Niamey, as a tool of outside pressure dressed up as regional solidarity. In its place, a new currency framework in discussion, a joint security force in formation, a shared political posture that treats Western conditionality as the problem, not the solution. Regional messaging from Russian-aligned partners reinforces the same theme, officials describing continued defense and humanitarian cooperation with the Alliance of Sahel States frame Moscow's role not as a replacement empire, but as a partner willing to show up without a checklist of political demands attached. Whether that framing survives contact with reality over the next decade is precisely what the rest of this story will decide. But therefore, this is not merely a story about expelling 2 diplomats. It is a story about replacing an entire operating system. The old operating system, aid tied to governance benchmarks, security cooperation tied to democratic timelines, partnership conditioned on Western approval. The new operating system, as Ouagadougou describes it, security assistance without political homework, infrastructure financing without ideological strings, partnerships built on transactions, not tutorials. Is this liberation, or is it simply trading one dependency for another? A French uniform swapped for a Russian one? A Brussels lecture swapped for a Kremlin silence? That question sits at the center of everything unfolding in Ouagadougou this week, and it does not have an easy answer. Look closer at what the expulsion actually costs and what it might buy. The European Union has, for years, funded programs across health, education, and local governance in Burkina Faso. The very program officer now given 72 hours to leave oversaw pieces of that machinery. Cutting that connection carries a real physical price. Fewer grants processed, fewer clinics resupplied through EU-linked channels, fewer scholarships routed through European partnerships. But the government appears to have made its calculation. It weighs continued Western aid bundled with public criticism and parliamentary resolutions against a security-first partnership that asks fewer questions and moves faster. Ordinary Burkinabè now sit in the middle of that calculation. A mother in a displacement camp near Kaya does not experience diplomatic relations. She experiences whether a clinic has medicine this month, whether a road gets rebuilt this year, whether a soldier arrives before or after an attack. Therefore, the real test of this expulsion will not be measured in press releases. It will be measured in clinics, in roads, in whether the promised Russian and Chinese partnerships deliver security faster than European aid ever delivered development. And there is a harder question still circling above all of this. Does sovereignty mean choosing your own partners, or does it mean depending on no one at all? Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger have not achieved full self-sufficiency. Grain shortages persist in parts of the region. Security gains, even with new partners, remain incomplete. Displaced populations have not all returned home, and attacks continue in border zones. The AES project is young, its institutions still forming, its long-term outcomes still unwritten. But something has undeniably shifted. A decade ago, the idea of a Sahelian government publicly expelling senior EU diplomats over a parliamentary resolution without apology, without backing down under pressure, would have been unthinkable. Today, it is Tuesday's headline. The old assumption that African governments quietly absorb Western criticism in exchange for aid is breaking apart in real time, not just in Ouagadougou, but across a widening arc of the continent. What replaces it is still being written. Will the AES bloc deliver the security and development its people were promised? Will its new partnerships prove more reliable than the ones it just discarded? Or will history repeat itself, with new foreign patrons standing where old ones once stood? 72 hours from now, 2 European diplomats will have left Ouagadougou. Their offices will sit empty, their programs will pause, or transfer, or quietly fold into someone else's hands. But the deeper story will not end with their departure. It will continue in the next resolution Brussels drafts, in the next base Russia opens, in the next road China finishes, in the next speech from Ouagadougou daring the world to say something about it. The Sahel is rewriting its own rules in real time, in public, without asking anyone's permission. 72 hours. That is all the time the old order gets to accept what has already happened. After that, the clock resets and a new chapter begins, one written in Ouagadougou on Burkinabè terms, whether Brussels approves of the wording or not. The only question left is who writes the next chapter, whether the world is even watching closely enough to see it coming.